Welcome everyone. Today we will discuss what would have happened if the Ottoman Empire joined the Entente in World War One. Now, as a bit of historical context, ever since the 1800s, the Ottomans were in a constant state of decline. Their military was extremely inefficient compared to their European counterparts. Their economy was dependent on foreign loans. There were constant rebellions, some of which were successful, like the Greek War of Independence and Muhammad Ali's Egypt. Not to mention the constant wars with Russia, almost all of which were won by Russia. All these factors and more weakened the Sublime Porte, and after the Crimean War, it was given the nickname the Sick Man of Europe. During the outbreak of the Great War in 1914, the Ottomans initially stayed neutral, but in 1915, two German dreadnoughts escaping the Royal Navy at the Mediterranean went to Constantinople seeking refuge. By this time, the Ottoman Empire was a constitutional monarchy in name, with the Sultan being a figurehead while the parliament ruled the country in all but name. The real power rested with the triumvirate of the three pashas. They chose to give refuge to the German dreadnoughts. Before the war, the Ottomans purchased two dreadnoughts from Britain, but they never arrived, as due to the war, Britain had to use them. Seeing this as an opportunity to gain a new ally, Germany gifted the two dreadnoughts to the Ottomans, which the Minister of War and the strongest men in the triumvirate Enver Pasha used to attack Russia, officially announcing an Ottoman entry into the war on the side of the Central Powers, and the rest is history. But what if this never happened? Today we will answer that question, but before starting the video, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel, as it would help me create more alternate history scenarios just like this. But without any further ado, let's start the scenario. Our story begins in 1914, before World War One. Here we will change the Ottoman Empire internally. To do that, we will have Enver Pasha slowly lose power in the triumvirate due to his failures in the Italo-Turkish War and the Balkan Wars. Instead, we will have the slightly pro-Entente Jamal Pasha become the strongest man in the triumvirate. When the war breaks out, the Ottomans will initially stay neutral like they did in our timeline. Here we will have the British actually give the Ottomans the two dreadnoughts they ordered instead of taking it for themselves, which soured Anglo-Ottoman relations. In early 1915, when the two dreadnoughts arrived, seeking refuge in Constantinople, they would be rejected and handed over to the Entente. In late 1915, the Bulgarians would join the Central Powers, securing the Balkans for them. To open a new front, Britain would offer the Ottomans Cyprus and Kuwait and forgive some Ottoman loans, which the Turks would accept, with the Ottomans joining the war on the side of the Entente. With this, the already tense government in Greece would finally decide to join the Central Powers, with King Constantine managing to beat Venizelos. This would result in both Greece and Bulgaria attempting a large offensive with the aim to take Constantinople and knock the Ottomans out of the war. The man defending the Balkans would be Mustafa Kemal, who would defy the orders by the triumvirate and retreat from Adrianople to Constantinople to better defend against the Greco-Bulgarian army. This would cause tension between the triumvirate and Kemal, and within the members of the triumvirate, with Enver and Jamal Pasha constantly butting heads. The Greeks and Bulgarians would attempt to take Constantinople but would fall into Kemal's trap. The Ottomans would win the battle, with it being their finest hour. This would cause Kemal's popularity to surge, while the corrupt triumvirate becomes ever so unpopular. In 1916, the Greeks would manage to make a landing in Smyrna, heavily supported by the Germans and Bulgarians. Here, the Ottoman triumvirate government would start collapsing, with Kemal deciding to do the same tactic he did in the Balkans, which would miraculously work, leading to the Central Powers being kicked out of Anatolia. With Kemal's popularity at an all-time high, in early 1917, he would attempt a coup with the help of the military and the Sultan, with the triumvirate splitting up and running off to Central Asia. Kemal would start an offensive into a weakened Greece and Bulgaria, knocking them out of the war. By late 1917, the war would end in an Entente victory. Germany and Austria-Hungary would get the same peace treaty they did in our timeline. Bulgaria would lose Alexandroupoli to the Ottomans and some border regions, while for Greece there could be two parts. The first is more realistic, in which Greece gets mild treatment, while the second is one in which Greece gets a really harsh peace treaty. To make things more interesting, we will have to go with the second option. Greece would lose Crete and Thessaloniki to the Ottomans, while the Aegean Islands get split between Italy and the Ottomans. This would leave Greece broken, battered, and beaten, with them slowly turning to radical ideologies. In 1918, the Ottomans would intervene in the Russian Civil War, where they would invade the Caucasus until Britain stopped them from going any further. As the Russian Civil War reached its climax, the Ottomans and British would make an agreement to carve the Caucasus between themselves. Britain would gain influence over Georgia, the Ottomans would annex Armenia, while Azerbaijan becomes an Ottoman puppet. No Armenian genocide would happen, resulting in a larger Armenian population. When the Russian Civil War ends, the Bolsheviks would be pissed at the Ottomans, souring relations between them. The 1920s would be a time of rebuilding and growth for the Ottoman Empire. Oil would be discovered in Mosul and Baku, which would fuel modernization efforts. For the 1920s and better part of the 1930s, the CUP under Kemal would remain in power, focusing on the modernization of the Ottoman state, although the modernization would be fairly limited to the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Levant. This would create a wedge between the Arabs and Turks, who would start to view Ottoman rule as foreign colonialism. This discontent would also brew amongst the Armenian, Greek, and Kurdish populations in the empire. But the empire would remain stable. Externally, the Ottomans' two main rivals would be Italy and Greece. Greece in the early 1930s would fall to an ultra-nationalist coup aiming to achieve the Megalea Dea, while in Italy Mussolini would claim his Italy as the rightful successor to Rome, which would directly coincide with the Ottomans who styled themselves as the successors to Rome, and even held the second Rome, that being Constantinople. This rivalry would be akin to that of Italy and Greece of our timeline. After the Great Depression, the Ottoman economy, like most of the world, would go into recession, but thanks to oil, they would recover quicker than most countries. During the outbreak of World War II, the Ottomans would remain neutral, but in 1940, Italy alongside Greece would declare war on them. Initially, both of them would get stuck in Thessaloniki, but when Germany arrives, they would blitz all the way to Constantinople as the Eternal City falls. The Ottomans would move their capital to Ankara. Italians would be busy in North Africa with the British, while Germany would launch Operation Barbarossa in 1941 like they did in our timeline. This would leave Greece, who would attempt a naval landing in Anatolia, which after landing would get stuck in western Anatolia, where the Ottomans would hold them off while suppressing Arab and Armenian separatists funded by the Axis. In 1943, the Ottomans would manage to kick the Greeks out of Anatolia, and in 1944, with coordination from America and the British, would launch a joint invasion of southern Greece, with the Ottomans reclaiming Constantinople. They would go further into Bulgaria, which would surrender not to the Soviets, but to the Ottomans, leading to them not falling to communism. Peace treaty: Greece would lose Corfu to Albania and some border regions to Yugoslavia. A population exchange would occur between Greece and the Ottomans, which would result in most Greeks being deported from the Ottoman Empire. In the Cold War, the Ottomans, due to Soviet fears, would be a part of NATO. In the 1950s, the Ottoman Empire would start to rebuild, and once oil is discovered in Arabia, they would annex their vassal of Jabal Shammar and the kingdom of Najd and Hassa. The oil from the region would fuel further modernization efforts in the Caucasus, Syria, and Iraq. By the 1960s, tensions would rock the Ottoman Empire as nationalism arose amongst the remaining ethnicities in the empire. This would be supported by Egypt, Iran, and the USSR. Egypt, especially, would become the main rival of the Ottomans and would declare herself protector of the Arabian people. While in the late 60s, taking advantage of Ottoman instability, Azerbaijan, with Soviet help, would declare its full independence from the Ottoman Empire. This would follow soon with more separatist revolts till in the 70s it would turn into a full-blown civil war. This war would see Egypt joining in to help the Arab separatists. At the end of the 70s, the Ottoman Empire would cease to exist, with Armenia, Kurdistan, and Arabia breaking away, leaving just Turkey. The Armenian state would be much bigger than our Armenia, with them gaining large parts of Pontus. Kurdistan would break away with Iranian help, while the newly declared Arabia would join with Egypt to form the United Arab Republic. Turkey, having lost its pride, might go on to have communist uprisings. But this is where I'll end the scenario. If you want me to continue it, let me know. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But for now, goodbye.